Welcome to the Music Wide Open podcast
The place for an honest and thought-provoking conversation
about music,
business,
life,
technology,
and the future,
for curious music enthusiasts.
and musicians seeking personal growth. I'm Ingolf Wunder.
And I am Paulina Wunder. When one reads biographies of musicians, listens to their interviews, or simply gets information firsthand from them, one realizes that the vast majority share a common denominator. They face difficulties in their private romantic lives. Looking for real and long-lasting love and devotion seems to be more complicated for musicians than for people of other professions. The complexity of their nature, work, and lifestyle demands a great deal of understanding, patience, mutual respect, and kindness. Whether in a relationship with a fellow musician or with a non-musician, there is often a substantial, life-defining sacrifice involved for one or both partners. Therefore, many end up alone or in unfulfilled relationships. But why is it so? And does it really have to be that complicated? This is what we will be talking about in this episode. Okay, let's start from the very beginnings. So, from the youth. What are the challenges in finding a partner at the very beginning?
As a classical musician,
Let's stick to classical musicians. Yes.
well, that probably depends on the time you live in. In our time, definitely, simply classical music isn't cool.
That's true. Unfortunately, it's changing and it's not cool enough. Yes.
So it might have been cool in the 20s. I don't know.
It depends on the country, though.
Probably.
It depends on the country because still in some countries it's still in 80s.
Definitely was
I
cool
believe
when
it
Liszt
was cool.
lived.
That's right, yes. But let's not go that far. I would like this episode to be, in a way, helpful for maybe the younger musicians.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, much more important than the cool thing is time constraints. Like, you have to practice a lot. You have to, if you take it serious, it means that a big part of your, life, day, week, month, is just you sitting alone in the room and play music. And that's sort of an obstacle.
That's true, and of course you might meet some people at the music university or wherever you study, but that's also quite difficult to maintain such a relationship in one's youth.
Exactly, because they practice too. Plus, you have, maybe already early career pressure and stuff like this, and
Rivalry as well.
So I think, despite that being a topic that in some cases is for sure not well generalizable, but I think it's safe to say that for musicians often it's hard to find partners that are non-musicians, or at least harder.
That's true. This is of course as well due to a totally different path and the lack of understanding, but we'll come to this a bit later. And it's also due to, I think, due to the ego of musicians. That's another subject.
Yeah, ego, absolutely. But ego might be also for non-musicians sometimes a problem. But what's also, I think, a factor is that musicians are brought up in that education system, or at least in my time, to have a god that is music. Like you live for music. Yes. There's nothing else in your life.
That's true.
And while that's helpful in many ways and sometimes really true, and then it's great because then it's the spiritual thingy, it sometimes is as well an obstacle to
That's
actually, have a normal life, so to speak.
It is counterproductive for your romantic life in a way. So
especially if the non-musician partner, let's say, wouldn't understand that.
That's another thing, and we'll come to this as well. That's why, of course, at this point, many music students happen to have relationships with a fellow musician from the same university or music school, which can work for a while, doesn't have to. Then later, if their paths are separated by life and opportunities brought with it, that's another difficulty. Maybe let's make it more specific here. We will be talking now about two types of couples. Number one, musician plus musician. So either both play the same instrument, or both sing, or each of them plays a different instrument, or one is an instrumentalist and the other one is a singer or a conductor. And type number two, musician plus non-musician. I think it's important to separate these two types, because the life of these couples often look completely different. Right. Let's talk a little bit about the musician plus musician couple. What are their challenges?
I think it depends probably on the instruments that they play, because if they are sort of compatible, it's easier. Well, I mean, if you can play together or have sort of a common artistic growth as well, or you have from the same instrument, which is a problem, because if most of the cases there are instances where it works well as always, but most of the time it means that the one that has a bigger career or more talent in some way will have the lead role, and the other one has to be honestly happy with stepping back and supporting that, or without developing a complex.
This setup probably works better for orchestra musicians, because they can have both sort of comparable careers and avoid.
That's right, because there are usually you are not in the spotlight.
Exactly.
Alone. I mean, you are in the spotlight, but sort of, not like a soloist.
Sometimes you manage to be in the same orchestra, sometimes in two different orchestras, but
which is another problem.
Yes, that's another problem. But this is a common problem for all musicians, because of the different time management and so on. But coming back to this musician plus musician, and we know that one is always a little bit, I don't want to say better than the other one, but unfortunately it's very rare that both are on the same level in terms of their talent and musicality and so on. It's at least these examples that I can think of.
I mean, then it really depends on the character of the people, because the characters have to, each character has to allow to either step back or to either be comfortable leading, or while in an ideal, this is my view of a relationship, by maintaining the balance that is needed for a relationship to work, right? Because if this is out of balance, then it might still work for decades and then break down.
Or it's in a way a bit artificial.
Yes, but it has to fit to the personalities, because if you are somebody who is not comfortable stepping back and supporting the other, but still do that, then it will at some point go bad.
The frustration just grows simply. But there are many people that are fine with stepping back, because they see, for example, if one has such a potential or opportunity that arises to really make it, then it's sort of easier. And if you really love the person, then it's sort of easier to step back and then find another way how you can feel comfortable in such a relationship. I think it's...
Yeah, and as I said, I mean, if it's in the character of that person to support, maybe, there are such characters, obviously, then it gives pleasure to support and to reach it together, and that's beautiful. This is ideal. Another thing that springs to mind is, of course, a sort of a problem for musician plus musician that these people might not even be aware of, but this is that they're both being in their own small bubble only. Meaning, if they're in classical music, for example, often there is no grand vision of how the world looks outside that bubble, and which
it might be secondary, frankly speaking. We are talking here about the happiness in the relationship, and if it's possible to make a stable, long-lasting relationship.
That's correct, but sometimes due to this lacking grand vision, unhappiness can come.
That's true.
That's my point. And if once this unhappiness is creeping in somewhere, then it can do something.
Probably the best scenario is when both musicians, if both of the partners are musicians, can perform together.
Yes.
Like there are couples of pianists and singers, or there are musicians that are making chamber music. It is possible. Then you can actually make something that is long lasting. You travel together, and it's absolutely beautiful, and you sort of can motivate each other. But again, it depends on the ego of both of them. So in a way, it's very individual, of course, what happens.
Absolutely. And scheduling conflicts, of course, I mean, as we have, you mentioned that with the orchestras, but of course, if you have two soloists traveling in two different parts of the world at the same time, because you have to, it's also not fun.
That's why, as we know as well, it happens often that these relationships between musician and another musician don't last long.
Yeah.
Because many musicians are unfortunately this way, like other people as well, obviously, self-centered. So if you even start to have a relationship with a fellow musician, and then your ego kicks in, that's why I mentioned at the beginning the ego, then you might have a problem with another person who might have the ego as well, as big as yours or even bigger. It will not work either way. And in that case, and probably this is the reason why musicians face so many problems in their private lives, that they cannot simply cope with this discrepancy, shall we say, between their vision of a relationship and the reality.
Exactly, that comes in again their inner ranking of what's more important, if it's their own career or the relationship, in a way. Because I think the point I want to make is that it's probably in any relationship, doesn't matter if musician or not, but I think this human layer down, the basic stuff, is something one has to focus on. But many people sometimes don't do that, or don't have the time to listen to this gut feeling, or to something that is not happening in the conscious brain, in a way, to know that's the right thing, and to really feel it, not only, and know was the wrong word, and not rationally know, but feel that it's the right thing, and then put the stuff on top. I mean, it's hard to explain, but
so priorities in life.
Yes, and,
in a way.
But of course, it doesn't mean that a musician, because in order to excel at anything, you have to be allowed in a relationship to fully focus on this one thing that you want to excel in. Otherwise, you will not excel.
Yes, but any kind of relationship is about, in that case, romantic relationships, about two people.
Exactly.
So,
but that's why the balance is, and this is it's a kind of, really a balance act that both have to do, and it's hard.
And it is hard, absolutely, it is hard. That's why these musicians that face more private problems than the other ones, or jumping sometimes into this ocean of one night stands and so on, because after the concerts they are pumped up. It's as well probably easier, and if they play with other musicians, music connects people in many ways.
Yeah, it does. And here, of course, triggers something that many people probably will not talk about, but this is the business side of romantic relationships, because this is something quite dangerous in many ways, I think, for true love anyway, but also for getting ahead, let's call it this way, in some other way than your playing skills. and this is something I personally don't like, but it's life. It happens everywhere, and
that's true. And it can, unfortunately, like that, not only in case of musicians, but other artistic professions, I would say, unfortunately, this might help your career if you are sort of, let's put it this way, you don't have a problem with short-lasting relationships, just that they bring you something.
Yeah, and it often does
short-term
help. Yeah, exactly. But this is, of course, a moral question. We live in times where
what's moral?
Morals are often not on the first line. But this one has to be aware of that this might be a reason why, and also, to be honest, as a musician, you have a traveling life on that level, and it's simply easier to do such things.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're traveling alone, and even if you have a relationship at home, so to speak, if you don't travel together, which in nowadays times is rare.
Easier to forget, easier to start a new day with a fresh
exactly
head.
and if kind of it's a business relationship, so to speak. I mean, if you do that for business reasons, then there's also a good chance that it stays between the two parties, because you both have sort of something from it. But it's toxic. I mean, obviously, for relationships.
Toxic, and there is a bigger probability that such a musician who chooses this kind of path starts to jump from one relationship to another.
Yeah,
which in the end makes him unhappy, because in the end, what is life about? It's about happiness. It's about sharing.
Yes, and I believe it's about deeper thinking and experiencing deeper things. Like this is maybe not the right word to say in English, but if you quench your lust in many ways, not sexually now only, but in all the things, material stuff, buying things, having just stuff for one day and then having something else the other, then it doesn't make you happy in the long run. Yeah. It might make you happy in the short term, but it always fires back. And I think it's as well in these, let's say, business one-night stands, yes, or even longer stands. It is the case.
It is in fact quite difficult to be a musician, to be a traveling musician, unless you have your spouse or a partner that travels with you and is also a musician, or not, but this we will talk about very soon. It is difficult to maintain any kind of relationship, and long-lasting and happy. And of course, for many musicians, when they get so much adrenaline after the concert and everything, they come back to an empty hotel room, and then what? They are alone. So it's not even if they have success and adoration from the public, from whoever rules the business as well at the moment, it doesn't bring you anything. It's very short lasting. So you need sort of kind of short time solutions, or something that helps you deal with with your loneliness.
Yeah, because otherwise these people go back to the hotel room and call their agent or their record label I mean, just to have somebody to talk to.
That's true. The second type is a musician plus non-musician. And this kind of a relationship as well can be a challenge in many cases. And this is what we will be talking about now. So let's talk maybe when such a relationship, a musician plus non-musician, is a challenge.
Since I'm biased, I have to, of course, say that if the understanding is there, then it's perfect and it's inspirational in any way.
But this understanding, it's a bigger subject, so here we will cover it at length.
But the problematic thing is definitely, lifestyle differences and understanding gaps. This is where I came from. These understanding gaps are, of course, because of different educational paths, different, most of the time, than different childhoods. Yeah. So a non-musician then rarely understands what it really takes in that musician life.
Yes.
And therefore also one cannot blame that the understanding is not there, because it's non-existent. So then it takes a lot of sensitivity and love probably to learn to cope with it.
So younger musicians should be aware of this before they go into a real relationship, that what they should actually look at. But what I think, it's a little bit different situation with these non-musicians whose family had a musical background, like in my case, for example, because then this understanding is in a way natural. You observe as a child the life of musicians. It becomes a part of your reality.
You listen to rehearsals when you're very young.
Exactly. You listen to rehearsals. You know that your parent or whoever goes for concerts, is not there, is touring. This is easier to understand then. But of course, it's much more challenging if a musician meets someone who, I don't know, is a lawyer or anybody else. I don't know why I mentioned a lawyer.
There's a lot of work as well. Maybe that's why you mentioned it.
Yes, that's true.
If both have a lot of work to do, then it's even more important that they understand each other, which is, of course, the basis, as always, this is generalizable, is communication. So one has to talk about these things. And awareness, because one has to be aware of them in order to talk about them.
Beforehand.
Yes. Beforehand, sometimes love happens and then it has to be not beforehand, but in the first stages of...
That's true, but especially if one is young, then one believes, this can be this way, I'm pretty sure we can make it, we're in love, everything will work somehow, and we will work on the rest. And
the honeymoon phase.
that's right. It's possible to keep this honeymoon phase for a longer time, but it's, again, awareness is probably the key here. And musicians have probably the biggest problems if they have an unsupportive spouse. And what I mean by this, we know that performing musicians deal with extreme emotions on stage. Tension. And of course, other musicians like composers, they as well need something else, need peace of mind and for creation, and they have their head in the clouds and so on. So this is a different story. One has to be simply aware of that, especially as a non-musician who is going into a relationship with a musician, what it means. Otherwise, it's just a short story, and then a poor musician doesn't understand what's happening, because, again, this is what you said, everybody lives in his own bubble and his own reality. So if you grow up with this, like, this is how the life looks, and the studies, and then the concert life and so on, and you think that this is how it looks, everybody should understand you.
Yeah. This is what generally people do. We always look at other things from our own bubble, and it's hard to Yeah, to look from other people's perspectives. It's impossible probably, but you can train it in a way to not only be in your own bubble. And this is, I think, very important for relationships as well, to try to be in the shoes of the other.
Do you think that it's even possible? Because unfortunately, again, I have to mention this for the sake of our conversation, that many musicians, unfortunately, have this a little bit this egoistic,
narcissistic?
yes, egoistic approach. And me, myself, and I, and my emotions and my sensitivity. You know.
Well, you see, I mean, in a way, it's part of the deal as well, because you have to have that on stage. If you don't have that in you, it's hard to be true on stage like that. That you give everything you have to the audience. But it's a hard thing to be aware of that and then sort of switch it on off when it's not needed.
What I see sometimes in musicians, that probably because they got used to it, this is something in the society that is accepted, that a musician or an artist, let's put it this way, an artist is excused in a way because he's blessed and he's such a talent, and there's something bigger about it. That's why let's excuse his flaws. But I don't really agree with this, and I think that this is sometimes overused by musicians themselves, because they think like, my music, I have to focus only on music, and so I don't agree with this, because in the end, first of all, any musician, any artist, you are a human being, first of all. And after that, you are a musician, or a very skillful musician, or a very talented one. And this is what we should, I think, focus on, is this very human side.
Well, ideally, this human side should show in the music. So it means a very narcissistic personality plays as well like this. I know these are subtle differences, especially when it comes to interpretation. Not only, you know, we're not talking about composers now, we're talking about interpreters. I mean, we're talking about everything, but I'm talking about interpreters. That is harder to spot these let's say, human character traits in the music, but they are there. And so it means if you basically work on yourself as a human, eventually your music will become better. But having said this, the kind of me, myself, and I aspect, one cannot erase that, because if you don't have that, you will not be good on stage. So I think the challenge for musicians is exactly to be aware of that, and then say, okay, I'm off stage. You know, I
would say, sorry to interrupt. I could think about some musicians quite a lot who are very good musicians, and they can show it on stage as well. But this sensitivity of theirs that makes them good musicians at the same time backfires in their private life, because it's about like, I'm so sensitive, I got hurt, my partner, husband, wife doesn't understand me, or didn't understand me if they're divorced. And this is, we are really walking here on a very thin ice.
Yes, but that's why I say the awareness, because you see, if one, I think it's, again, here we have to go back to the start, because this is about choosing the right partner, having that gut feeling, having that. It's really hard. It's at best, as in actually good interpretation, by the way, best to think as little as possible. Like, it's difficult to do that, because one always thinks rationally, but if you do it right by not thinking the right way, in a way, and let the subconscious decide, sort of, then you usually make better decisions. And if you make better decisions, I think you as a person will also be shaped differently by the partner. So in other words, if you have this me, myself, narcissistic trait, which you unfortunately or fortunately need to be a
A
good
little bit
artist
of
on
that,
stage.
yes, a little bit of that, yes.
Well, or more, as long as you're aware of it, and you can then make it digestible for
Yes.
the partner, to that extent that the partner is happy as well. You see.
Yes.
And this is, and I think with these examples that you have in mind, these artists are
You
not
read
even
my
aware
mind?
of that. It comes with time.
That's true. That's why it works in our case, yes. But I think a musician in a relationship with a non-musician must, first of all, respect the partner's opinion and wishes, and not be self-centered. And many musicians tend to be this way. Because it's easier, you know, you're in the spotlight, especially as a soloist. It's easier to put yourself in the center naturally. And music and one's playing is important, but what will keep a musician healthy and sane is actually the person who loves the musician. Do you agree?
Yes, because success is not a straight line, and not like people think it is. It's always up and down, and you have struggles when you have no career, and you have even bigger struggles when you have a career. Mm-hmm. So in both scenarios, you should have a partner that is really fitting to you and that keeps you sane. Yes, because many musicians kind of cut that short and travel with a mom or with a teacher that they know for ages, and
they start this way.
It
goes forever.
Keeps them sort of
sane
as well, but in a mommy way and teacher way, so they will miss what you need in
life. Well,
to be an adult.
Some might be really happy this way, but on the other hand, you cannot.
That's right. But what I meant is, what you need is not because everybody needs something different, obviously, but there's a in our evolution as a human, you have certain stages, and at some point, the organism wants to start his own family, or we are not meant to stay with mommy until we are 70.
That's true. That's a little bit against nature, I would say.
Yes, I mean, okay, in some cases it might work, because anyway, nature is not so prominent in their beings, and then it might work, whatever work means. But in many cases it's toxic as well, to not have that adult evolution
factor in your life.
Yes, because that will backfire in your music as well. Because that's what I believe, that's a big factor why you, in old artists, or let's say grandmaster artists from the early 20th century, you see in their playing, in their music as well, a huge difference and development in their lives, because they play completely different when they are like over 50, 60 than they played when they are 20 or 30, while nowadays it tends to be like that people kind of play the same, doesn't matter if they're 25 or 60, and this is not natural, and this has maybe also to do with that not natural life that they live. But this is just my hypothesis.
The other thing is that some musicians, if they don't have this stable private life, romantic life, let's call it this way, escape into music. And of course I believe it can be a cure, it can be a medicine, and for many is. But from a bird's eye view, is there a more beautiful thing in life than being able to share it with someone you love, and you're loved in return?
In my opinion, no, because this is what basically, there's fear and love, right? I mean, if you live in fear of you getting sick, stuff is not working, and if you live in love and harmony, and then things are going well. So, in other words, this sharing factor, and with that producing the love you need in life, is absolutely at the top.
Yeah. Now I would like to come back to this again, musician plus non-musician life, because it is really difficult, in fact, to organize such a life. If you meet a person who is a musician and you're not, then what are you doing? You have your own plans, you have your own dreams about your professional life. So such a couple has two options. Either everybody meets once in a while and spends some time together from concert to concert, and it might be, of course, fulfilling for these people who need more time for themselves, because there are such couples, they are great, but they cannot spend the whole time together. And that's why they are great as well at the same time. There are different types of people. But these ones that actually see a relationship as a common life of two people, then such a setup, a musician plus non-musician, and especially if it's a soloist, it is something to discuss before you make some serious decisions. So you get married or so. It means most of the time that you need to have full clarity, if it's even possible. In some cases, like in ours, it is possible. What's happening? How we want this life to look like. Probably the best option is this will sound maybe like a lecture, but I don't want to lecture anybody. Just give a hint maybe for younger generations. Probably the most clean solution is if the one who isn't a musician is able to give up the plans or dreams for the musician, especially if this person, if the musician is a soloist, and the life one knows will require or requires a certain flexibility. And I think this is as well the most beautiful pattern, in fact, for both types of couples. So these ones that are where you have both two musicians, where one steps back and becomes a partner, a supporting partner, and as well for a musician plus non-musician. They travel together, which is quite difficult, especially in nowadays times when it's not really understood, often not understood why couples are traveling together. But this way you create a certain, actually an incredible bond with a person. You collect memories together, experiences. This is a very powerful and a very strong relationship. Of course, it's more difficult maybe to maintain, especially once you want to have kids. But there is a way for everything.
And no, absolutely. I mean, we are here coming in a way as well to our life, which is, of course, beautiful. Really, from I think any angle. But I know how difficult it is for for the non-musician in that case to,
or for the musician that steps back and decides
exactly.
to be a partner.
Exactly,
because we know such relationships.
For the sort of stepping back person to do this. We solved that by just working and living together, like with everything we do. And I think for me personally, and for you too, this is the most beautiful thing, because then you just do everything together, and you complement each other. I mean, in a great relationship, that's also something I mean by this gut feeling, by choosing the partner.
And the most beautiful thing is about, sorry to interrupt, you share everything. When you travel together, you share absolutely everything. You share the experiences, you build the memories together. Exactly. And these memories are, in fact, a foundation of your future.
Absolutely.
You share hardships, you talk a lot. You get to know yourself and your partner in the most extreme situations as well.
And that's, I mean, the ideal situation, in my opinion, is just if you spend literally 24 hours together all the time. And
Yes, but we know that not everybody can do it this way.
I know, but this is then you're kind of sure that it's the right choice.
That's true.
If you don't need a break, right?
Traveling together, of course, might be difficult these days and difficult to arrange because it simply requires more money, and that might be a challenge for many musicians who are just not willing to take this.
Yeah, and might not be able to at the beginning, especially. This is really
unless they find a way how both of the partners are actually working and earning while traveling.
That's correct. This is, I think, nowadays, of course, much easier than in the past.
Much easier.
While in the past it was, of course, common that the artists, since artistry or music has had a different status in society, there was simply more money, so there was no questions asked that maestro was traveling with family, right?
Let's say we don't know that for a fact in every single case, but let's say at least it was not looking awkward for promoters, managers, and so on, because nowadays, actually, and I'm talking out of experience here. I faced a lot of time a look like, but why are you traveling together? Because we want to actually have a life together. Yes. Have you thought about that?
But even strictly speaking business, they should understand, because a happy musician is a better musician. But this is a different topic. So this is definitely something to think about and start being creative as early as possible to make it happen, because only if one spends time together, the relationship can be good.
Yes.
Long lasting.
Yeah. And this is what's important as well for musicians. I would personally give such advice to musicians. Be with someone who is at least as important to you as music is.
Yeah, happy relationships or the right partner have been muses so often, and have been, this is actually very inspiring for a musician as well. So strictly, speaking on the musical level, it's good as well. So and private anyway. So yeah.
Some young musicians could ask, okay, but how to find this right person? And this is really a question that is quite difficult to answer.
Oh, it's very
because you need to be, as a musician, you need to be open. You actually need to be accessible.
Well, I touched upon that with this gut feeling thing, because of course, if one rationalizes it, it's like shared values, obviously, that are important, mutual respect, which is, sounds like an empty phrase, but if one takes it seriously, it is what it is. And in a way, maybe also spiritual life, that this kind of fits, whatever it means.
Whatever it means, doesn't have to be a religion. It can be
exactly. That's why I mean
something
spiritual,
else,
so that you have a common
set of values.
Yeah, vibe of what might
what life is about, and
or
what's really important
might be.
Yes,
because that's also something that it should be a person that is willing and is happy to living the unknown in a way, and embrace it, that it's unknown, and look forward to everything that is coming, although you don't know what it is. And this in musicians' life often like this, actually in all the lives where you start something, that hasn't been done yet. Startup world is the same. And I think I know it. This is we have a really comfortable position, because we talk about something that worked out for us, and then you have to find such a person. It's really difficult, and
you have to be open for this, and then the life brings you the right has to person, be I believe.
In my case, definitely. I mean, I'm taking visualization serious from the very beginning. Even I didn't know as much as I do now back then, but I did live it already. And even at times when nothing was happening in any segment of my life, it was happening somewhere in my brain already.
That's the key.
And so things that you visualize will appear.
Including the right person.
Yes.
If you are convinced that it will happen eventually.
And if you really,
if you don't believe in it, it's like, yeah, I would love to, but I'm not sure, then it will not happen.
Basically, it's like
probably.
living
Yes.
the world already, although it's not there. So it's
Yeah.
like fake it before you make it in a way.
Yeah, so you have to believe that you're already there, or that you have that.
But seriously
this
believe,
person.
you know.
Yes.
So this
Yes.
this is hard to explain, but really sometimes, you know, when
We might make an episode about this kind of belief, or
it's living the belief.
Yes. Yes.
Which is basically a fake world.
Yeah. For you, well,
in a way, but in a good way, because I mean, who knows what this world really is anyway.
Yeah.
But this is like you live a world that isn't there yet.
For you, yes.
Yes.
But it exists already in your brain.
And therefore it will appear.
Yes.
In this or the other form.
What a non-musician and what a musician should pay attention to in another person, so a potential partner or a partner. Maybe I will start here. That's, again, we don't do this episode in order to lecture any musician couples who are happy together for many, many decades. The reason why we're doing this episode is to, again, bring awareness, but also to maybe help the younger musicians who very often are struggling with finding a right partner.
And have maybe never thought about that at the right time.
Exactly. As a non-musician, if non-musicians are listening, one should, first of all, pay attention to if this musician that you like is putting himself on the pedestal, or there's also a place for you. And it doesn't mean the compliments or the way how he looks at you or she, but if she or he really cares about this, what you want, what you dream of, what you wish for, and you feel that it's sincere.
And what a musician should pay attention to is in some way related to what you said. It's like if the person likes your music more than yourself, or if it's a fan of some sort or not.
Well, these couples, I'm not so sure if the fan
This is what I mean.
Work.
I think it should be, this is what I come back to this gut feeling thingy, that the vibes of the basic things fit. Yes, it's nice if you like the same kind of music. It's like it's nice if that non-musician or musician likes your music, and that's all fine. But there should be some layer underneath it that is most of the time more important in the long run, and whatever that is. Yeah, whatever that is, because that layer might be different for everybody, but there is definitely a layer under the music, and that's the one I would point my subconscious to.
I would like to end with a quote by Leo Tolstoy, because I think it fits very well here. And the quote is, "What counts in making a happy marriage is not so much how compatible you are, but how you deal with incompatibility."